Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast, friend of the program, more importantly, a friend of mine, and our resident Knicks Film School historian. He is kind enough to hop on here anytime we have, a little bit of NBA history that we want to reflect on. And sadly, this is one of those times. But I'm not sad to talk to him because he's awesome. Ray Marcano. Hello, sir. How are you?
As usual, John, I am humbled to be in your presence.
You're so ridiculous. You know how ridiculous you are, and you know how ridiculous I find you when you say things like that.
I know.
Yes, I know. But I appreciate it nonetheless. So I haven't talked to you since the Knicks season ended. We're going to do a little Knicks talk at the end of this because I always like to pick your brain just about big picture stuff, putting Knicks teams, Knicks players in perspective. But we'll save that for a bit from now because brought you on primarily to talk about Bill Walton. So Bill Walton passed away yesterday as we're recording this. It's Tuesday, late afternoon at the age of 71. And immediately after the news broke, you saw the sort of outpouring of like story after story after story, a little anecdote, like a long Twitter thread, just everybody contributing something they had to offer. And what struck me about it was, one, how many people out there whose lives he touched in some way or another, and two, how nobody had a bad thing to say about him. So I want to actually start kind of big, and then we could zoom in on a couple things. So for anybody who may not know anything about Bill Walton, because unless you were watching Pac-10 games over the last few years, you might, if you're someone under the age of 30, you might not really know who he is or much about him. Can you just like tell people when you hear the words Bill Walton, like what do you think of at first?
Well, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, not just one of the greatest centers of all time. For people that don't know much about how he played basketball or his style of play, he was Jokic before Jokic was cool. Not only that, he had a tremendous impact and influence on social justice issues in the 70s, which a lot of people don't recognize and don't talk about a lot. And he was a one of a kind when it came to his broadcast style. He's one of the few people that I actually would search for and search out to listen to because he was so good.
I remember when because when the NBA was on NBC in the 90s, he was obviously one of the voices of the league, and I remember him at that time. I don't think as a teenager I was as clued into the commentary. I was more like focused on the game, but I do remember there was this guy, and I didn't know anything about him as a player. This was before I became something of a, I tried to become an NBA historian myself, and I was just like, where did they find this guy? Because he was so out there and he was so different from anybody else doing it. And then eventually you come to realize like, oh, this is just who this guy is. And he's kind of been endearing himself to people across the country for a very long time. I actually want to stick on the social justice thing for a second, because that's one area that I know the broad strokes, but like, I don't, give me a little bit more on that. Like, cause I know obviously growing up in California, he was he's obviously a liberal in terms of his political views. Like, what do you remember about that part of his life?
Well, he played at UCLA in the early 70s. There was still a lot of, anti-war protests going on, a lot of social justice protests going on. And one of the things I remember most about Bill Walton, and I think this is 1971, I think I have that year right. He's playing at UCLA and he's a white basketball player amongst black teammates. And in the middle of a press conference or in an interview, he gets up and notes, I got to tell you, I got a lot of respect for my black teammates because in being with them, I'm getting to see everything that they have had to overcome. And it makes me realize from my position that I'm awful damn privileged. So when it was not cool to do, he was sticking up for black teammates in the early 70s. And remember where we were at the country at the time, right? We're just coming out of the civil rights legislation. Just because we passed the legislation doesn't mean that everything was great, because it wasn't. There was still a lot of segregation, not only in society, but also in sports. So for him to come out and say that, not only once, but over and over again, was, it took a lot of balls for a kid that young to do that. He's 21 years old, and he's going, "Hey, look at me. I'm standing up for this." So, good for him.
Yeah, it's again, I've learned a lot in like the last 24 hours since the news broke, but like I completely did not realize that his parents were, I think I want to say one of them was in education, and like but they were just like, down to earth folks, and they didn't care. Not that they didn't care about his athletic achievements, but like they weren't athletes themselves. Like they had no interest in sports. They just, according to him, were more interested in like what he was reading. So I guess from that perspective, it kind of makes sense that he kind of had that upbringing. And then, but on the other part, again, which maybe some of our younger listeners aren't as clued into, the guy he followed at UCLA was another very outspoken individual on social justice issues. But the big difference is, as you point out, Bill Walton was white and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, then Lou Alcindor, was black. So I wonder how that kind of dynamic worked when you had like it was the basketball lineage, but also this other type of lineage at UCLA there.
Yeah, the other type of lineage I'm not sure of. The only thing that I know from reading is that despite how great he was, Lou Alcindor at the time, he was not immune to the issues that black athletes felt in the day. I mean, all the racism crap that happened back then, he was not immune to that. From a basketball perspective, I don't know how you could be more blessed than John Wooden, going from 4 years of Jabbar to 4 years of Walton. And then after that, after Walton, he had a pretty decent college center after that. Nader came along. Swen Nader came along after Walton, didn't he?
That rings a bell, yeah.
Yeah, so he went like 12 years of really excellent college center. I don't know, what he did in life to deserve that, but good for him.
He seems to have been a bright guy, John Wooden, with his pillars of coaching and whatnot. Stick with UCLA for a second, because like the concept of 88 straight wins is, I can't even wrap my head around that. And that's what Walton did at UCLA. And yet I feel like his tenure is not necessarily, not that it's looked at as a disappointment, but correct me if I'm wrong, his senior year, when they did not win the national title, UCLA had won, I think, the previous 7 national championships before that. So under Bill Walton's watch was the first time in nearly a decade they hadn't won it, but they were so dominant before that. I feel like I remember I had, when I was growing up, like a magazine that ranked like the greatest college basketball players of all time, and they put Lou Alcindor 1 and they put Bill Walton 2. Do you agree with that ranking?
In terms of all-time NBA or all-time?
In terms
college?
of all-time college players.
1 and 2. Alcindor. I think that's pretty close. I think you could throw a couple of other names in there. I mean, Maravich was, oh my goodness, Jerry West. There are a number of them, but in terms of all-time dominance, I think it's clearly 1 and 2, Alcindor and Walton. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then he goes to Portland, number 1 overall pick in the draft. Again, I don't know a whole lot about his first 2 years there. I just know he didn't play a ton of games. So like the injury issues that would go on to unfortunately derail his career started showing up early. And then there was this magical, it was really just a season and a half, or a season and then 2/3 of a season, where the Portland Trailblazers were the best team in basketball. Do you remember anything about the 77 finals where the Blazers played the Sixers were favored in that series, right?
That series, there are 3 seminal points in my basketball life that I will always remember. 1 was the 69 Knicks season and that first championship. The second was Bill Walton. And the third was Toby Knight at Notre Dame. Those three things made me really interested in basketball. And Walton made me specifically interested because at that particular time, he was a ballerina on the court. He played that year and a half when he was healthy. He was the best basketball player on the planet. Sorry, Kareem. Sorry, the other people that were playing at the particular time. But he could do things as a big man on the basketball court that we had not yet seen. He could shoot from 18 feet easily. He could take big guys off the dribble. Like I said earlier, he was Joker before Joker was cool. And he was great at it.
And it's funny you bring up the Joker part of it because there's a quote going around, I guess, that Walton said back in 2018, where like Jokic he wasn't winning MVPs yet, but like he was already kind of on the scene, and he's like describing him, in a way that only Bill Walton can. But clearly, he saw something in Jokic early where he was like, okay, well this guy pretty clearly has something, something good going on here. And I mean, Jokic is kind of, I guess, taking it to a new level, but it makes me wonder, like in terms of what ifs, like specifically injury what ifs. Like more recently, we have Derrick Rose. We have, I mean, if you want to go to like Penny Hardaway, Grant Hill, and I'm just thinking like the last 25, 30 years. I don't know in the NBA that there's a better one. Bernard King, to give a example that's a little bit more relevant to us here in New York. I don't know that there's a better one than Walton, only because he did it at that level for long enough to, you could see like, okay, well, they're the best team. They won the championship. The next year they start off 50-10 when he goes down with an injury, and then they kind of fall apart after that and end up getting eliminated in their first playoff series. But it was also, so you saw that the peak, but it was also so short lived where you're like, what could this have been if this guy in different circumstances? And obviously, look, the guy had almost 40 orthopedic surgeries. That was not in the cards for him. But if he had been healthy, like I wonder how different NBA history would be. It's my big takeaway from thinking back on this.
Yeah, I think that despite his injuries, he still might be a top 5 center in NBA history. I mean, my list, I've got Chamberlain, Jabbar, Hakeem Olajuwon,
sure,
who's the best defensive big man ever. And then you got a group of 3, right? You've got Shaq, you've got Walton.
Did you say Russell?
And Russell. Those are the 3. You got Shaq, Walton, and Russell. That's a hell of a 3 to debate about. And in my book, it'd be Russell and Walton with Shaq 6th. A lot of people would argue about that. They go, well, you got to have Shaq in there. I don't know.
I think if we're talking, obvious, look, I only saw, in terms of like in my lifetime, I saw prime Shaq. I was young when, like, I remember the '94 finals, but I don't really remember much about Hakeem before that. Like I saw him. Duncan's I mean, you can't put Duncan in the center categories. He played power forward, so we should consider him a power forward. And I didn't see any other guys, but just in terms of like accomplishment, accolades, at their absolute best, maybe Walton should be in the top 5. And look, that got him into the NBA's top 50, and it got him into the NBA's top 75. And like, full disclosure, I disagreed with that inclusion because when I did my own exercise and I made my own list. To me, there had to be a certain amount of longevity, associated with it. And I thought there was a little bit of, why should Walton get in and Bernard King shouldn't? Now, obviously, Walton won everything. He won an MVP. Bernard finished second in MVP. never made it past the second round. But he also had a few more years there. Like I think he had maybe 3 or 4 All-Star All-NBA years, where Walton again really only had the 2, and then his Sixth Man of the Year award in 1986 with the Boston Celtics, which I think is maybe what puts him over the edge, because he did have that little footnote. It's more than a footnote to his career, but he had that extra little bit. It's an interesting conversation. I remember the old Bob Ryan line. I don't know if you saw this, that like if the aliens descend onto planet Earth and we need to play a 5-on-5 game to save, our collective souls as humanity, and you could take 5 basketball players just in the history of the NBA, his starting center would be Bill Walton. So I don't know. Bob Ryan's seen a lot of basketball.
Yeah, much more than I have. And there are 2 other interesting asides to that. One is, if you're talking about longevity, which is a fair issue to look at, then he comes out, and then all of a sudden you're talking about Shaq, Moses Malone, Patrick Ewing, David Robinson.
Sure, yeah.
They're all, because of longevity, they're all ahead. Another thing, we probably don't have time to get into this today. Maybe it's a conversation you and I can have at some other time. Is if you're talking about centers that would excel in today's game, then Bill Walton's number 1. And it's not even close.
That's a good call.
And then you start talking about some other people, like, the folks we've forgotten, like Jack Sikma, who wasn't as skilled as Bill Walton, but boy, he could do all those things: the outside shooting, the pick and roll, passing, getting everybody involved, that would have translated to today's game. Not nearly as great as these other greats, but he could play today.
Yeah, I mean, I think and you nailed it earlier with the passing part of it. I mean, well, we should say Bill Walton, the year they won the championship, led the league in rebounds. He averaged 14.5 rebounds a game, and also led the league in blocks that year, 3.2. And like his assist numbers that year, I mean, just under 4 assists a game, or he had 5 assists the next year. But like, just like I have the breaks of the game behind me, just reading about that Portland team and just how cohesive they were on the court. It feels like maybe he didn't generate the assists, but he was the most instrumental cog in the machine in terms of just how they played, which is how they beat an arguably more talented Sixer team in the finals. One more on Walton, just because, and then we'll do some quick Knicks stuff. The post playing career, in terms of like the announcing and his mannerisms and just how he went about his business. Like, I think it felt like he got on people's wrong sides, but like some people were kind of annoyed by him, and he just seemed like not to care. And he just was like going to be who he was. Like, do you remember, how did people view him as an announcer in like throughout the 90s when he was on NBC?
Well, it depends, right? I mean, a lot of people found him to be horribly annoying because he was not a traditional basketball announcer. I mean, you're not a traditional basketball announcer when you wear, as he got later into his career, Hawaiian shirts and tie-dye shirts, and you do jokes on the air like he did at, I think it was a Oregon game in the Pac-12. Dave Pasch asked him, "How you doing, Bill?" And Bill's wearing his Hawaiian shirt. He says, "I'm doing great today. I got laid." And he points to the lay around his neck. Another one of my favorite ones, I was watching, this as a Utah playoff game, and I'm watching the game, and Utah is just having a terrible, terrible game. And Walton, as they're trying to describe the game, Walton breaks in and says, in the NBA, can you make trades during the third quarter of a playoff game? Because this team sure needs it.
That's a good line.
Completely irreverent. And I'm glad you brought up Barkley, because he paved the way for the Charles Barkleys of the world. Because until then, think about all color commentators. They were buttoned up, stiff. They knew basketball, but they were, and God knows I love UB Brown as an analyst, but they were all UB Brown types. There was no Bill Walton talking about, explaining to somebody how, the air mass index works in the middle of a basketball play. And he didn't care. He was great. Like I said, he's one of the handful, I think one of 4 or 5 people that I would actually seek out to listen to because he was just so good at what he did.
I don't know that there's anybody like that's the thing, right? There were people that didn't like him, but there was nobody like him. And because of and like I got to tell you, there was it was a year, 2 years ago. I was flipping around and I saw, I think it was on NBA TV. They had some kind of a simulcast of some game or another, and it was Walton and I forget who it was with him, just doing commentary on and they were like talking over the game the whole time. Like Walton was the star. Like the game itself was not the star. It was Walton that was the star, and he was just riffing and everything. And like I sat there and I watched the entirety of the game because Bill Walton was doing his thing at the time, and I don't know that there's anybody else around that could have made me do that, you know? So, yeah, he'll be missed. There will never be another like Bill Walton, on or off the court. All right, we're going to take a quick minute to say hi to our friends at Foreplay. What's up, Knicks fans? You know, the other day, I was talking to two girls, and they were telling me how into Foreplay they are and how they wished they had more single guys to do it with. No, not that Foreplay. We're not talking about getting teed up on the pod. I'm talking Fourplay, Foreplay. It's an app where single friends team up and double date other single friends. It's more fun, lower pressure, and a safer way to meet new people, which is exactly why single girls love it. They do. In fact, they love it so much that they make up the majority of teams on the app, as in a 3-to-1 ratio in your favor. Look, we all know everything is better with a friend. Just ask Josh and Jalen, even if Brunson won't admit it. And with Foreplay, you don't have to sacrifice bromance for romance, because it's a chance to enjoy a night out with a buddy while meeting two new people in a more social environment without any expectations. The icing on the cake, it is totally free. All right, it's game time. So head over to the App Store now and download Foreplay. That's Fourplay, and get ready for a little 2-on-2 pickup. Let's talk a little bit about the Knicks before I let you go. We've talked about.
Before we do,
yes.
Before we do, since we're changing subjects,
yes,
I'm doing a wardrobe change.
I like it's taking off the Knicks Film School hat, and you're putting on. I don't even know what that hat is, but it's a nice hat. The world needs journalists. Yes, it does. So, since the world does need journalists, and I do have a journalist on here with me, how do you think? How historically significant do you think this next season winds up being? We had a lot of fun in the moment, but at the end of the day, it was a second round loss, which same as last year. I'm wondering, like, there are certain Knicks years that we look back on, even if we weren't around for it. Like, I think everybody kind of hopes this will be the equivalent to 1968-69, which is the year that they traded for Dave the Butcher and was the year that preceded, the first championship. I don't know. Where are you? Where's your mind at right now?
Fourth best ever.
Fourth best
ever. Behind 69, 73, and 94. Fourth best ever.
Wow.
Yeah. Now this team, I took a look at this yesterday. I believe this is in terms of a history of Knicks basketball. Their record was only the 13th best in Knicks history for all Knicks teams.
I'll double check that now, but that sounds about right.
Yeah, and I'm going to take off the Knicks hat now because I just look too damn goofy, even more goofier than normal. However, I think that the championships and getting to the finals is an absolute given. But in all of those teams, and even they all got there. That's all a given. The ones that just made it to the Eastern Conference Final, we had those tough losses against Chicago and Reggie Miller. What we think of him in Indiana. The difference is all those teams were healthy. they had everybody all season. And I went back and looked, and I took a look at the individual games played by all the players. They're all healthy. They had everybody. So then I started thinking to myself, is there even any team in the history of the NBA that suffered as much injury for not only their starters, but their top bench players, and had so much turnover during the year with trades? And I can't think of anybody. And despite all that, this team willed its way not only to 50 wins in the regular season, but also to Game 7 of Round 2 of the NBA playoffs. Getting the second round of the NBA playoffs, Game 7's hard enough. Just ask all the teams that were supposed to get there and didn't. And they did it literally with their best player on one leg, much of the other team hurt, and on the backs of a few guys playing ungodly, in this day and age, ungodly numbers of minutes, 40, 45, 48, 50 minutes a night in overtime. You can look back at this and go, sure, there are teams that have had better records. And sure, there are teams that you could argue that had players that were more fun. But I think this team, this group, this year is so special that there's only 3 that can top it.
I think that's okay. I think that's fair. I just looked it up, by the way, in terms of winning percentage, 14th out of they've played 77 seasons. So like, yeah, there's some other years that are ahead of it. One of which was in the 50s. I should note the early 50s, which I'm not going to ask you to recall that. 2 of which actually were in the 50s, because it's a little bit before your time.
I'm surprised you didn't say Ray was a ball boy on one of those teams.
No, I would never. Yeah, I mean, look, 99 was, they obviously went to the finals, but that was a year from hell. That was not a successful year. That was not very successful. And then I think the other one is 92, 93, when they won 60 games and they, fell to Jordan in the Eastern Conference Finals. But I think to your point about what they like that team, they didn't have to deal with any injuries, and they were like, they were so loaded that, I mean, was it a disappointment to lose to Michael Jordan? Is it ever a disappointment to lose to Michael Jordan? I mean, he's Michael Jordan. Even back then, he was Michael Jordan. But yeah, I think that would be the only other one, at least since the championship years, that you can put there, unless you want to throw. What was the year they lost to the Lakers in the finals in 1972?
70,
yeah. I guess would be the only other one. But like, look, whether it's top 4, top 5, top 6 over the last 50 plus years, that's really significant. And now, the challenge is, can they keep it going? And we'll see what they could do. Last thought. Any last thoughts from you? I mean, what do you get anything on the docket for the summer? Like, what are you excited about?
Oh, I'm excited about writing for the Knicks Film School newsletter this summer. I really am, honestly. I mean, every summer you allow me to write.
This will be the third one.
Huh?
This will be the third summer.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. You allow me to put my crazy thoughts out there, and people actually read it, which still stuns me. So I'm excited about that. And outside of doing a whole bunch of traveling, everything is good. And of course, taking care of my bourbon collection right behind me. Or should I do it this way? I don't know. Whichever way it is, I should do it that way.
Either way, shameless plug. Subscribe to the Bourbon Resource.
Subscribe to the Bourbon Resource. Shameless plug. But also, while you're at it, if you're not a subscriber to Knicks Film School, please make sure you do, because not only do you get this guy, Jonathan Macri, but you get some of the best talent in NBA basketball in the country, or as Bill Walton would say, ever since Michelangelo painted David, has there not been such a great group of NBA analysts than here at Knicks Film School?
Oh, goodness, Ray, you're too kind. You could read Ray. I mean, Ray, you're all over the place. You should be following Ray on Twitter. His link, or his Twitter handle will be somewhere in the description of this episode. Subscribe to the Bourbon Resource on Substack if you just like reading good writing, or if you're a fan of bourbon, or you want to become a bigger fan of bourbon. And you'll hear from Ray again, I'm sure, before too long. And yes, you will be able to read Ray throughout the summer. We usually run his columns on Fridays. Excited to do that again. Thank you for giving us a few minutes, Mr. Marcano. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Look forward to contributing through the summer, and look forward to seeing more of the Knicks Film School podcast.